is what's going on inside your mind when you're doing all the thinking that you're doing. Because you experienced it. Some days you don't know what's going on, but you feel terrible. Other days, for no damn reason, you feel great. So what's really happening? One of the most effective ways I found working with my folks, my clients, to get a peek inside your mind is what's called internal family systems. Now, this system was originally based off family systems used in family therapy. I won't go too deep into it, I promise, but this part's useful. But family systems, it's basically, I'm avoiding the geek part, I swear. It's basically a way of thinking of your psyche. Your psychic energy is a dynamic system that involves stories and characters, because we think in stories and characters. And we project these stories out into the world, and it affects how our relationships are with our family and so on. So turns out that even when you turn inwards, you tend to do that. All the psychic energy we have going on inside us, as a way of coping with it, as a way of making sense of it, we break it into these characters. And I was speed walking before, so I'll catch up. But we break into these characters, and these characters play specific roles and allow us to manage and control our energy bouncing around. Now, the thing about projecting into these characters is that suddenly you realize you don't have control of a lot of them, not directly anyway. So you experience a lot of these characters as, sometimes as yourself when you identify with them, call it being blended with them, and sometimes as, really toxic, shitty inner critics, judges, we call them firefighters, and I'll get into that more in a bit, but just these super destructive forces that, seem to show up inside you energetically and tear through your shit, flip your life over, kick the dog, skin the cat, and whatever other disturbing metaphors you can think of right now. Dog did not like that. That's my neighbor's dog. He was like, what's up? But anyway, so to make a powerful but kind of a weird set of concepts that we happen to intuitively understand anyway, make even faster sense and be more powerful, sort of in a snap, it's easy to think about them as when you're using the language of parts. Part of me wants to get up this morning. Part of me wants to stay in this comfy bed. We have these parts inside us. Now, if you imagine that these parts since they're parts, they don't necessarily have to be whole. The main thing about them is if you imagine them as agents, having agency, and kind of fighting for space inside you, inside your psyche, inside your imagination, inside your mind, whichever structure works best for you. So as these parts are bouncing around, one of the things that can happen is you can step into a part. You identify with it. It's the same. The best way to think about it is when it's kind of challenging sometimes to remind yourself that the voice in your head is not you. Simple trick for that, by the way, is one of my mentors taught me this. He was like, well, when people are coming with the voice, ask them, can you stop it? No, I can't. I can't make it stop. You can meditate and all that stuff, but ultimately you can't make it stop. It's not you. It's not you. And as such, disidentify with it, get off the ride. Another strategy that I came across during my reading is the simple question. If this voice is making you miserable with the things it says, why do you believe it? It's challenging to listen to it, and a lot of times we try to create so much noise in our lives that we can't hear these internal monologues. But sometimes making noise gets so exhausting and so draining and drowns out the meaningful things in your world where you gotta sit your ass down, and then it's like, holy crap, it's me and this noise. So sometimes instead of trying to cover the noise, the option is to hear it and then just call bullshit on it. When you develop that ability to stop believing it, stop identifying with it, stop thinking I'm a bad person because of these things going on inside me, that instantly gives you a sense of self-efficacy. And a large part of your mood is affected by self-efficacy. Case in point, self-efficacy is how much you believe you can get shit done, basically. You can imagine someone who is low self-efficacy might not want to commit, not someone who is, because just to be clear, we all have periods of low and higher self-efficacy and affects our affect. So if you're in a state of not feeling very efficacious, someone might say, hey, you want to grab, a lunch across town next week. And, high-end restaurant, maybe expensive, whatever. And your system is automatically like, we ain't going to be able to do it. Whether it's because we can't get the budget together, whether we can't make the drive, whether we, if we're super depressed, we might not be able to commit to being able to get up and act out that day. Might not have saved the money based off impulse control. You basically do this assessment moment to moment. And there's beyond that, there's self-efficacy expectancy, which is sort of all day you're doing this rapid calculation of how able do I expect myself to be at such and such time based on how I feel now. So I said I wouldn't go too deep into the weeds, but it's helpful to realize that when we talk about depression as learned helplessness, basically what happens is you've learned to not trust your own self-efficacy. You've lost trust in yourself. So that's why behavior activation, which I mentioned yesterday, is so powerful, because if you can break what you need to do up into such tiny pieces that you could either lock in long enough, like focus long enough to actually steer your thoughts, steer your action, and get that reward, that dopamine hit of I did it. Something as simple as, if you think back to my kid during the last summer, not the one that just passed, but when he was younger, he'd be like, look how long I can hold my breath. And other than me wondering whether he was going to end up, floating with some sort of pneumonitis, water damage, basically, I was watching him, develop a sense of pride and self-efficacy by his ability to sit down there and go hypoxic, Yeah, that's a good example. But ultimately, by picking these smaller goals, we create this architecture of empowerment. But the thing is, when things get really shitty and explosive and big, we want these big solutions. We want, $1 million instead of I wish I could finish this application, or, I wish I could perform well at this interview. We hopscotch. Is that hopscotch? Leapfrog is better. We leapfrog over all the steps that, it's not even smell the roses, because nobody wants to smell roses when life is hardcore. But we leapfrog over all the steps that will get us there in our mind. And so we deprive ourselves of these little dopamine hits that stack up and that allow us to develop a sense of self-efficacy and self-efficacy expectancy. And it's a mechanism of disempowerment, because, a lot of times, me, because I was neck deep in psych stuff, a lot of times I would hear that certain conditions like alcoholism, depression, some of the obsessive compulsive disorders had an aspect of expectations being too large, So in your mind all day, your inner critic is expecting more of you, and you're always falling short. And depending on if you grew up in an environment with narcissistic parents or a parent, there was also the element of moving goalposts, where you expect when you figure something out to get there and to get your dopamine, you expect that negative reinforcement. And reinforcement is intermittent. So you create a loop of self-deprivation from the dopamine you need to learn your reward signals, which super sucks. Yeah. So my hope is to not wander too far from the set of ideas, but at the same time to give you enough traction in these concepts so that when they show up small, you can realize the associated mental action, and associated with the mental action, the benefit of setting these smaller expectations that are more manageable, more doable, that you can hold in your mind, just this tiny action that you're doing long enough to prove to yourself, look, I did this. It's the whole idea of the first domino. You're not gonna roll up, and this is, if you imagine the metaphor where there's a string of dominoes and the last one is ginormous. You're not gonna try to brute force push against the giant domino. And the physics of that is, just real quick detour, that they did a set of studies, and if you Google it, you can find it, where they found that if you have a set of dominoes lined up and each one is twice the size, height, width, kind of proportionate, twice the size of the one before it, you can knock out a way gigantic domino with this tiny, almost comical sized domino as the first domino. The main underlying theme in that metaphor is when you have something ginormous waiting for you to knock over, it doesn't mean that you have to go boss mode and take a running jump sprint, and cowabunga into the giant domino, shattering all your bones, probably creating a concussion, and ultimately wishing you had paid attention to some fundamental physics. But instead, you could just flick that first domino and watch the momentum. It's the same thing in behavioral activation. It's the same thing with these inner conversations you'll have. Because if what you're trying to do is add noise and have this escalating competition, the voice in your head is always going to be able to go louder, because if you go so loud, they're going to drag you off out here. In the psyche that we call it actively responding to internal stimuli. The shit inside you is pouring out bad enough that everyone else is experiencing some aspect of it, and they want to help you with that. 72 hours. Not to make fun if any of y'all have spent some time in a 72-hour hold. I'm not making jokes about it. Yeah, I am, because you gotta laugh or cry, right? So, yeah, I think that's the core idea, is the small steps. And with the holidays coming up and New Year's coming closer, we want to jump to the resolutions. We want the big, I want to accomplish this for 2026. Well, what's the smaller domino? What's the tiny one? What's the one that won't fracture everything you own and will allow you to each day, either get better at spotting tiny dominoes that are lined up with ginormous ones, or at the very least, choosing to attempt things that, not to kill your big dreams, but choosing to attempt things where you can strategically notice the domino that's within your range, and being okay with that, and focusing your attention on what's in front of you in the moment, and trusting the rest of the narrative to continue to follow these laws of physics, these universals. So it's not that you're undeserving, you're defective, you're not worth it, not broken. Just stop running up on them big ass dominoes, I guess. All right, Dr. Manny, I'm out.